everyone, and welcome back. Today we're going to be taking a deep dive into a really fascinating topic that's got the tech world kind of buzzing right now. It's the future of Apple's App Store. And specifically, we're looking at, can Apple really hold on to its famously closed ecosystem, or are they going to be forced to move into this open App Store model?
Right.
And our guide for this deep dive is a really, really interesting excerpt from a Korean article. And the article's called Brazil's Demands for App Store Opening and Apple's Future.
Yeah, and what's so interesting about this is that it's not just a tech industry issue, right? It's kind of playing out on this global scale.
Yeah.
We're seeing legal battles, policy changes, and just tons of debate about what the future of app distribution is going to look like.
Absolutely. So to kind of get us started, this Korean article dives into this recent legal decision in Brazil, and a judge actually ruled that Apple has to allow third-party app stores on iOS devices.
Yeah.
I mean, isn't that kind of a big deal? I thought Apple was known for being super strict about controlling its app ecosystem.
Well, it's a huge deal, and it really highlights, I think, this growing pressure on Apple to shift away from their closed model.
Yeah.
The judge, in this case, Judge Pablo Zuniga, he argued that Apple's really, really tight control over iOS and all the restrictions on third-party apps are actually stifling competition.
So it's not just about giving users more choice, it's about creating a fairer playing field for developers too.
Yeah, exactly. And this ruling in Brazil, it actually echoes similar moves that we're seeing in Europe with the Digital Markets Act,
Right.
which is specifically designed to kind of regulate big tech companies and promote competition. So it feels like there's this global trend emerging.
Wow. So it sounds like the walls are closing in on Apple's walled garden.
Uh-huh.
But I'm guessing they aren't going down without a fight.
Oh, you're absolutely right. Apple has consistently argued that opening up the app economy is going to compromise security and privacy for all of their users.
Right.
And they've actually already announced they're going to appeal the Brazilian court's decision.
Which makes sense because, security is such a huge selling point for Apple. They've invested so much in building that reputation.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, how exactly does Apple claim that this would affect security?
Well, a big part of their argument revolves around sideloading, which essentially means that you're downloading and installing apps from sources that aren't the official app store.
Right.
And Apple argues that this opens the door for, all these malicious apps, and it increases the risk of users downloading malware or, exposing their data.
Okay, yeah, I can see how that would be a concern, especially if users are downloading apps from, less reputable sources.
Right.
But wouldn't developers still have to adhere to certain security standards, even in an open app store environment?
That's a really good point. And there are people who argue that Apple is really overstating the risks of this.
Yeah.
They point out that platforms that have more open app stores like Android, they haven't exactly become these havens for malware.
Right.
Android has its own security measures in place, and generally users learn to be cautious about where they download apps from.
Yeah, you got to be careful out there.
Right.
So it seems like this argument that open app stores automatically equals less security is kind of an oversimplification. But at the same time, there's no denying that there are some inherent risks involved, right?
Yeah, exactly. And this is where I think the debate gets really, really interesting, because it's about weighing the potential benefits of, increased competition and user choice against the potential drawbacks in terms of security.
Right. It's a tough call for sure. But what I'm finding really interesting is that despite Apple's, really strong stance on this whole security thing, they haven't actually been winning these legal battles.
Right.
This article even mentions that Apple has a history of successful appeals in similar cases in Brazil. But this time it seems different.
It does seem different. And this losing streak is definitely raising some eyebrows.
Yeah.
I mean, so far, no court has actually sided with Apple's arguments. And some industry experts are suggesting that maybe this points to a weakness in their legal defense.
Interesting. So even if Apple truly believes that opening up the App Store would compromise user security, it seems like they haven't been able to convince the courts that, their fears are justified.
Yeah.
It's almost like they're losing the narrative here.
They are. And there's another layer to this whole story that the article highlights, and that's the issue of App Store fees.
Ah, yes. The infamous 30% cut that Apple takes from developers.
Yeah, it is.
That's been a major point of contention for years, hasn't it?
Absolutely. A lot of developers argue that these fees are exorbitant and that Apple is basically using its monopoly power to just extract an unfair share of their profits.
Right. And I'm guessing this fee structure is a big part of the reason why developers are pushing so hard for open app stores. Because if they could distribute their apps through other channels, they could potentially bypass those fees altogether.
Exactly. And the article makes this really interesting point that, the real elephant in the room here is this lack of discussion around what's actually fair or acceptable profit in a capitalist system.
Yeah.
It's a really tricky issue to kind of address, especially in like a legal setting.
It does seem like a bit of a Pandora's box.
Yeah.
But isn't this fee structure a little bit at odds with Apple's claims about, prioritizing the user experience?
It's a great point because if developers are forced to pay these like really high fees, it stands to reason that they might have fewer resources to invest in actually developing high-quality apps or, keeping their prices low for users.
Right, and it makes me wonder if maybe Apple's commitment to security and privacy is perhaps overshadowed by their desire to just maintain control over the whole app ecosystem and protect their revenue stream.
Well, that leads to another fascinating aspect of this whole story.
Okay.
And that's the contrast between Apple's, staunch defense of the App Store fees and their equally strong stance on user privacy in other areas.
Oh, yeah. I remember that whole controversy a few years back when the UK government wanted to force Apple to create a backdoor into iCloud encryption.
Right.
Apple fought them so hard and ultimately refused to compromise user privacy.
Exactly. So we know Apple's not afraid to stand up for its principles when it comes to user data and security.
It's almost like they have two sets of values, one for user privacy and another for developer fairness and App Store fees. It does seem a bit contradictory.
It certainly does. It raises some really interesting questions about Apple's priorities and, how those might be shifting as the app landscape evolves.
For sure. And speaking of evolving, let's move on to the next part of our discussion.
Yeah.
We'll explore what this all means for Apple's future.
Yeah.
So we've kind of laid out the battlefield here.
Right.
Legal challenges, security concerns, financial battles, and maybe even some internal contradictions within Apple itself. Now let's try to predict what the future holds.
Right.
This is where it gets really exciting.
Absolutely. In the next part of our deep dive, we'll delve into the potential scenarios for Apple in a world where open app stores become the norm.
Okay, so we've established that Apple is facing some, pretty serious pressure to open up its app store.
Yeah.
But let's just say, for argument's sake, that happens. Let's say they actually lose this battle. What does that future actually look like? Is it just like a total free-for-all where every app just goes wild?
I mean, it's unlikely to be complete chaos.
Yeah.
Remember, Apple has spent years and years cultivating a certain image, right? A certain expectation of quality and security in their app store.
Right.
And that doesn't just disappear overnight.
So you're saying that reputation, that brand loyalty could give them kind of an edge even if they're not the only game in town anymore.
Think about it. Like if you're used to the Apple ecosystem, you've probably come to trust that the apps you download are going to be relatively safe and well-designed. You might even be willing to pay a little bit more for that peace of mind.
Okay, so even if other app stores pop up that are offering, cheaper apps or a wider selection, some people might stick with Apple Store just because it feels familiar and trustworthy.
Right.
But is that really enough to keep them afloat in a much more competitive market?
It's a good starting point, but they can't just rely on, their past reputation forever.
Yeah.
The article actually suggests that Apple needs to kind of shift its focus.
Okay.
Instead of being the gatekeeper, they need to become more of a trendsetter.
So less about controlling every app that enters their store and more about setting the standard for what a great app should be.
Precisely. They could really leverage their strengths in areas like hardware design, user interface, and privacy to create a truly premium app experience that really stands out from the crowd.
Okay, so imagine a world where you have a choice. You can download an app from a third-party store for a couple of bucks less, or you can get the Apple-approved version.
Yeah.
Which might cost a bit more, but it comes with that guarantee of a certain level of quality and security and seamless integration with your other Apple devices.
Yeah, that's the idea. And it plays into Apple's existing strengths.
Right.
They already have this really loyal customer base who are willing to pay a premium for Apple products and services.
So they could essentially position themselves as the luxury brand of the app world. But even luxury brands have to innovate to stay relevant. What kind of innovations could we actually see from Apple in this new landscape?
Well, the article hints at a few possibilities. For one, they could really double down on their commitment to privacy and security.
Okay.
They could develop, even more advanced security features, privacy-enhancing tools, maybe even create a whole system for certifying apps that meet their really strict standards.
So they could almost become like the gold standard for app security developers would really want to have that app as certified badge on their apps.
Right.
Because it would signal to users that their app is trustworthy.
Exactly. And it could even extend beyond individual apps to the app stores themselves.
Yeah.
Imagine Apple creating a set of guidelines for third-party app stores that want to be listed as, Apple approved.
Interesting. So instead of fighting against open app stores, they could actually embrace them and use their influence to kind of shape the entire ecosystem. But wouldn't that mean giving up some of their control?
It would definitely require a shift in thinking for them.
Yeah.
But, the article argues that this kind of adaptation might be necessary for Apple to survive and thrive in the long run.
Right.
Clinging to their closed model
might
actually backfire.
It's like trying to hold back the tide,
Exactly.
Eventually you just get swept away. But embracing change, that's where the real opportunity is. It's about turning a potential threat into a strategic advantage.
And it's not just about security in app stores either.
Okay.
Apple could also explore, totally new revenue streams beyond just app sales.
Oh, like what? Give us some examples.
Well, they've already kind of dipped their toes into subscription services with things like Apple Music, Apple TV Plus, and Apple Fitness Plus. They could really expand those offerings, maybe even create bundles that include, access to premium apps or exclusive content.
That's true. They're already starting to move in that direction.
Yeah.
And, with their push into AR and VR, you could imagine them creating these entirely new app experiences that aren't even possible on other platforms.
Exactly. They could become like pioneers in the metaverse.
Yeah.
Building these really immersive worlds and experiences that are only accessible through Apple devices.
Wow. That's a pretty exciting vision of the future.
Yeah.
But let's be real for a second. Apple has a history of being pretty controlling and resistant to change.
Yeah.
Do you really think they're capable of this kind of transformation?
Well, they've certainly had, their share of missteps and controversies over the years. But they've also shown this incredible ability to adapt and innovate.
Right.
I mean, remember, they weren't always the tech giant they are today.
Right. They had to pivot from personal computers to music players to smartphones to stay relevant.
Exactly. They've totally reinvented themselves before. So maybe this is just, the next chapter in their evolution.
So it's not really a question of F they change, but how W they change. And that leads to a whole bunch of really fascinating questions.
Yeah.
Will they compete on price? Will they, double down on their premium image? Will they become collaborators instead of gatekeepers?
Right. And perhaps most importantly, what will this mean for users like you? How will your experience change in a world of open app stores?
Okay. Yeah, that's the big question, isn't it? We've talked about the business side of things, the legal battles, the potential for Apple to reinvent itself.
Right.
But at the end of the day, it's all about how this actually impacts the everyday user.
Exactly. And that's what we're going to be exploring in the final part of our deep dive.
Okay.
We'll look at the potential impact of open app stores on the user experience, both the positive and the negative.
Okay, so we're back for the final part of our deep dive into Apple's future and this whole open app store thing. And this is where it gets real for, like all of us as users, right?
Absolutely.
Because we're talking about how our experience might actually change.
Yeah, we've talked about, the legal battles, the business implications, Apple's potential strategies. But at the heart of it all, it's really about the user.
Right.
You're the one who's going to be navigating this whole new app landscape.
So let's put ourselves in the user's shoes for a minute. Imagine a world where, Apple isn't the only one controlling what apps we can get. What are the potential upsides? What gets better for us?
Well, I think the most obvious benefit is just increased choice.
Yeah.
Think about it. You could have access to this whole universe of apps that Apple might not allow in their store right now.
Okay, so more apps, but what kind of apps are we talking about? Give me some examples.
Well, for starters, you might see apps that offer, alternative payment systems so you could bypass Apple's in-app purchase fees and maybe save some money.
Ooh, that'd be nice, especially for those of us who spend way too much money on mobile games.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You might also see apps that compete directly with Apple's own services, offering alternative features or, lower subscription costs.
So more competition could lead to better prices and more, innovative features. That sounds pretty promising.
Exactly. And this increased competition could also really benefit developers because it gives them more leverage to negotiate better terms with the app stores
Right.
and potentially pass those savings on to users.
Okay, so more choice, lower prices, more innovation. It's starting to sound like open app stores are a win-win for everybody, but I know you said there could be some downsides too. What are those?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest concern and one that Apple keeps bringing up is security.
Right.
With multiple app stores all vying for your attention, it becomes a lot harder to ensure that every single app that you download is actually safe and trustworthy.
So instead of having Apple's App Store as like this, single curated source,
Yeah.
we'd have to be way more vigilant about, checking out apps ourselves.
Exactly. You need to be more aware of where the app is coming from, the developer's reputation, the permissions the app is requesting, all that stuff.
That does sound like more work for the user. And let's be honest, most people probably don't even read those app permissions anyway.
Yeah.
It's just like click, 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 accept all.
Right. And that's where the risk comes in.
Yeah.
You could end up, downloading an app that's full of malware or one that collects and sells your data without you even knowing.
So it's kind of like this trade-off between freedom and security.
Yeah.
You get more options, but also more potential dangers.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And it really highlights how important user education and awareness is going to be.
Yeah.
If open app stores do become the norm, users are going to have to be much more proactive about protecting themselves.
Maybe there could be like some kind of third-party app security rating system, Like how websites have those trust seals or security certificates.
That's a really interesting idea, and it speaks to the potential for innovation in this new landscape.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll see, security companies step up and fill that gap, providing tools and services to help users make more informed decisions about the apps they download.
Okay, so security is a big one. What other potential downsides should users be aware of?
Another concern is fragmentation. Imagine having to manage multiple app stores, each with its own interface, its own update schedule, its own payment system.
Yeah, that just sounds like a hassle.
It does. And what if some of your favorite apps are only available in certain stores?
Right, you'd have to be jumping around all over the place just to keep everything up to date.
Exactly. And that fragmentation could also extend to the app experiences themselves.
Okay.
Imagine, an app developer decides to create different versions of their app for different app stores, each with slightly different features or functionality.
So instead of having this consistent experience across all your devices, you might end up with a slightly different version of the same app on your phone, your tablet, your computer.
Right. And that could be really confusing and frustrating for users.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so it sounds like there are definitely some legitimate concerns about open app stores. But it also feels like a lot of this comes down to how well these new app stores are actually managed and regulated.
That's a really key point. If there are clear security standards, user-friendly interfaces and ways to ensure app quality and consistency, then a lot of these potential downsides could be mitigated.
And maybe Apple could even play a role in, shaping those standards, even if they're not the only gatekeepers anymore. They could use their influence to push for a more secure and user-friendly open app store ecosystem.
It's definitely a possibility, and it would be, pretty fascinating to see Apple, the company that's known for its closed ecosystem, become a champion for open standards and responsible app distribution.
It's almost like they could become the elder statesmen of the app world,
Right.
guiding the industry towards a better future, even as they have to adapt to this new reality.
And ultimately, it's up to us, the users, to decide what kind of app ecosystem we want to support. We have the power to choose app stores that prioritize our security and our experience, and we can demand better from developers and platforms.
So it's not just about Apple changing, it's about the whole app landscape evolving, and, we, the users, are right in the middle of it all.
This brings us back to that thought-provoking question we posed earlier. How can Apple leverage its strengths to maintain its position in this changing market?
It's a challenge for sure. They can't just rely on their old playbook.
Right.
They need to find new ways to stand out, to offer something truly unique and valuable to users.
And if they can do that, they might not only survive, but thrive in this new era of open app stores.
Yeah.
They could become even stronger, even more innovative than they are today.
Well, I don't know about you, but I'm feeling a lot more optimistic about the future after this conversation.
You do?
It's not just about Apple. It's about the entire app ecosystem evolving and finding new ways to, serve us, the users.
Exactly. And who knows what amazing innovations might be just around the corner. The future of the app world is wide open, and that's what makes it so exciting.
Absolutely. So keep those brains buzzing, folks. Stay curious, stay informed, and keep pushing for a better app experience. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.